Well, hi, I'm Maxwell Norton. I've been a farm advisor in Merced County for 35 years, and I work with tree fruit and grapes, mostly wine grapes. In the arid West, and this is a problem that's common to all types of agriculture here in the arid West, is that under drought conditions, salinity issues usually become much more pronounced. There's a couple reasons being as ground dries out, the salinity level in the soil water becomes higher. The second is during drought times we start to rely on groundwater much more than surface water. In California agriculture, it's always preferable to use surface water that originally came from a river someplace, because it has very or no salts at all. As we use more and more groundwater, and as the groundwater becomes overdrafted, that groundwater becomes more saline. And so as we're applying irrigation water to our vineyards here in California, to orchards as well, we start to increase the salinity of the soil, and eventually that becomes toxic to the grapevines. Well, in our nutritional programs, as we get into a drought scenario and we're starting to recognize that we're contributing more salt from the groundwater, that needs to become a driving force in our nutrient management plans. We have to accept the fact that when we apply fertilizer, we're usually applying salts, and that we need to take that into consideration. It's important to remember that during drought, we're not going to have as much vine growth, and so smaller grapevines need less nutrients. So during drought periods, we're probably applying less fertilizer.
Does that have an effect on yield then?
Both the water deficits and less fertilizer can eventually have an effect on yields, and we will have to accept the fact that our vineyard yields will be lower during these tough times. It's very important to have a good understanding of how much water is stored in the soil. Sometimes we begin irrigating too soon in the springtime before the grapevines really need additional water. When there's a small canopy in the springtime, the grapevines are actually using very little water. Most of the water is probably being used by the cover crop. And so during drought times, we're probably eliminating or severely limiting the amount of cover crop we have, simply so it doesn't use up valuable water in the springtime before the grapevines develop a large canopy. There's a lot of technology out there, a lot of gadgets that are available for measuring soil moisture, and they're all very effective, and everybody has their favorite. It's very important, though, to spend the time to really learn how to use them properly, and more importantly, working with whoever manufactured them or somebody who's a consultant, learn how to use that technology appropriately so you can interpret the information properly and be able to have a better understanding of what your water trends are in the soil. We also have other things that can measure the water status of grapevines directly. There's some very fancy devices that you can strap onto grapevines. I don't know how to use them, but one device that I've used quite a bit over the years was the pressure chamber. And this pressure chamber, we take the leaf and put it into a chamber, pressurize it, and we are able to use that to estimate the water stress that the grapevine is under. It's probably not a practical device for small farmers to have because it's rather expensive. It takes some practice to use, but it is very popular with consultants. And some of the larger grape vineyards in the state, probably it's worth their time to have somebody trained to use the pressure chamber. Besides all the technology that we have available for us, and it's great to go to trade shows and see all these great new devices that are being marketed, but it's good to sometimes get out the good old soil auger with a 4-foot handle on it and find out for yourself. Look at the soil and feel the soil and get a good feel for what's actually in the ground. That way you know that your technology is working, and also it gives you a better gut feeling as to what's happening below ground. If you have a severely limited water situation and you're, for instance, only have a foot, 18 inches of water to apply during the year, you probably don't have any water for the cover crop. There's a lot of excellent reasons to have cover crops in vineyards. They have a variety of environmental services. They help protect the soil. But when push comes to shove, you have to preserve the water for what pays the bills, and that's the grapes. And so you may want to keep the cover crop mode very, very low, or even eliminate the cover crop altogether. Organic producers are really in a tough spot because their choices for sources of nitrogen and other nutrients are limited. And organic producers tend to use more compost and manure. We have to keep in mind, and that's something they need to work into their equation, is compost and manure can carry a pretty high salt load per unit of nitrogen, for instance. So if you are if salt considerations are driving your decision process, that becomes a real driver in terms of how much you can put on. You have to be very careful. If you apply a lot of salt, you need to be able to have a way to try to eliminate the salt from the profile. And the only way to do that is really leach it out. And that implies that we have some extra water.
And if we don't?
Yeah. So if leaching out salts and you already have a salt problem, you may need to be very careful about applying manure and compost. A common misconception is that you can reduce vineyard water use by eliminating the crop. The opposite is true. If you eliminate the crop, more resources are available for shoot growth and canopy development, and you'll end up with a larger canopy. What drives water use in a vineyard or an orchard, or any plant for that matter, is the number of illuminated leaves per acre. The bigger the canopy, the more water is going to be pumping out of the ground. So that's not the way to eliminate water use or to reduce water use. You want to keep your canopy smaller intentionally so you have fewer leaves transporting water from the root system into the environment. Now, with a smaller grapevine and with fewer leaves resulting from drought and from less nitrogen, you're going to be able to mature a smaller crop because the amount of crop you can mature is limited by the number of illuminated leaves per acre, because that's where the sugar is made. So you may have to reduce your crop to get it into balance with whatever canopy that you have.